The Arizona Territory, 1873. Dust and desperation hang heavy in the air as Emma Thornton watches her father's hands tremble around a whiskey bottle. Once a respected rancher, John Thornton has become a hollow shell of himself since her mother's death. Debts pile high as his drinking deepens. When a band of Apache warriors appears at their struggling homestead, Emma feels only a flicker of fear until she sees the look in her father's bloodshot eyes. A decision made in drunken despair, a handshake, a nod, and suddenly she is currency, traded for a barrel of whiskey to the stern-faced Apache leader who studies her not as property, but with unexpected curiosity. What could this warrior possibly see in her that even her own father had forgotten? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Miller family store sat on the edge of Copper Creek, a dusty frontier town where gossip traveled faster than the weekly mail coach. Sarah moved through the cramped aisles, her broad shoulders carefully navigating between precariously stacked goods. At 28, she had long ago accepted that Grace would never be her companion. "Sarah, the flour barrels need moving before the Hendersons arrive," Thomas Miller called from behind the counter, not bothering to look up from his ledger. His pen scratched across the page, recording debts that grew with each passing month. "Yes, father." Sarah lifted a 100-pound flour barrel with practiced ease, ignoring the familiar ache in her back. 10 years of running the store since her mother's passing had built strength most men in town couldn't match. Her younger sister Eliza swept in, golden hair catching the afternoon light. "Mrs. Abernathy says her dress will be ready tomorrow. Isn't it beautiful?" She twirled, showing off her delicate frame in a new pinafore. Thomas beamed at his younger daughter. "Pretty as a picture, just like your mother." Sarah continued stacking barrels, invisible in her father's gaze. At 19, Eliza was everything Sarah was not. Petite, graceful, with a tinkling laugh that drew admiring glances from every eligible bachelor in Copper Creek. Later that evening, after closing the store, Sarah retreated to the small room she shared with Eliza. From beneath her bed, she pulled a worn wooden box, her mother's sewing kit, and from inside it extracted her secret. A sketchbook filled with detailed drawings of plants, animals, and landscapes she observed during rare moments alone. "Those are really good," Eliza said softly from the doorway. "Mother would have loved them." Sarah quickly tucked the book away. "Father wouldn't approve of such idle pastimes. Father doesn't approve of much these days." Eliza sat beside her sister on the narrow bed. "I heard him talking with Mr. Blackwood again today. About the debts." Sarah nodded grimly. The bank owner's visits had become more frequent, his threats less veiled. "I've been keeping the accounts. Another month, maybe 2, before we can't hold him off. If you hadn't figured out how to treat the Johnsons' sick cattle last spring, we'd already be closed," Eliza said, squeezing her sister's work-roughened hand. "Father doesn't see how much you do." A crash from the kitchen interrupted them. Thomas Miller had returned from his evening at the saloon, earlier than usual, but no less affected. "Girls," he called, voice slurring, "come help your poor father to bed." Sarah rose automatically. This too was her duty, guiding her father to his room when whiskey made his legs unreliable, as it did most nights since their mother's passing. "You shouldn't have to do everything," Eliza whispered. Sarah shrugged her broad shoulders. "What else would I do? It's not as if I have suitors lining up at the door." Later, when the house had fallen silent, Sarah unfolded her mother's quilt, her most treasured possession. Each square told a story. Baby clothes, wedding finery, a scrap from her father's first shopkeeper apron from happier times. Her mother had stitched it during her final illness, working until her fingers could no longer hold the needle. "Find someone who sees your strength as a blessing, not a burden," her mother had whispered when presenting the finished quilt. Don't settle for less, my strong girl. Sarah traced the careful stitches, remembering how different her father had been before grief and whiskey hollowed him out. How he'd once proudly introduced her as my daughter who can outwork any boy in town. Now those same traits brought only embarrassment and jokes at her expense. Tomorrow would bring another day of labor, of invisible service, of bearing the weight of a failing business while being too large, too strong, too much for the world around her. Sarah folded the quilt carefully and returned it to its place of honor at the foot of her bed. Outside her window, coyotes called to one another across the moonlit desert, wild and free and answering to no one. Sarah closed her eyes and dreamed, just for a moment, of a place where her strength might be valued rather than mocked, where the vastness of her heart might matter more than the breadth of her shoulders. The trading post buzzed with unusual energy as word spread of Apache visitors. Sarah busied herself rearranging merchandise, creating wider pathways between shelves. Experience had taught her that customers often knocked things over when nervous, and nothing made Copper Creek residents more nervous than Indians. "Make sure the ammunition is locked away," Thomas Miller instructed, his bloodshot eyes darting toward the door. "And count the inventory twice." Sarah bit back a retort about how she'd been managing inventory since she was 18. "Yes, father." The small brass bell above the door chimed as Sheriff Burke entered. "Miller, you sure about this trading business? These Apache have hit 3 settlements north of here." "Different band," Sarah replied, before her father could. "Chief Dakota's people have maintained peace for nearly 2 years. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Mighty knowledgeable about Indian affairs, aren't you, Miss Miller?" Sarah turned away, resuming her work. Her interest in territorial politics was yet another trait that marked her as odd among the town's women. By midday, a group of 7 Apache men appeared at the edge of town. They moved with purposeful dignity, leading pack horses laden with goods. At their head rode a man whose straight posture and measured gaze marked him as their leader, even before one noticed the distinctions in his clothing and adornments. The town seemed to hold its breath as the Apache delegation dismounted outside the general store. Sarah watched through the window as women hurried children indoors and men casually positioned themselves near weapons. Chief Dakota entered first, ducking slightly beneath the doorframe. He stood taller than most white men in the territory, his features composed in an expression of dignified neutrality. Around his neck hung a small leather pouch, adorned with intricate beadwork. "Welcome to Miller's General Store," Sarah said, stepping forward when her father remained frozen behind the counter. "We've prepared space for trading." If Dakota was surprised to be addressed by a woman, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded respectfully. "You speak for this place." "My father owns the store," Sarah replied, gesturing toward Thomas, who finally shook himself into motion. "I assist with transactions." What followed was a careful dance of commerce. The Apache brought finely tanned hides, woven baskets, and medicinal herbs. Sarah recognized from her secret studies of the land's natural remedies. In exchange, they sought cloth, metal tools, coffee and salt. Sarah maintained the ledger while her father retreated to his small office, emerging occasionally with alcohol on his breath. She found herself impressed by Dakota's shrewd but fair bargaining and his perfect, if formally accented, English. "You learned our language well," she commented as they finalized terms. "At the mission school," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. "They believed it would civilize me. Did it?" The question escaped before Sarah could consider its propriety. For the first time, a hint of a smile touched Dakota's lips. "It gave me weapons they did not intend." His fingers briefly touched the beaded pouch at his chest, a gesture Sarah recognized as one of reassurance. The trading progressed smoothly until a group of cowboys burst through the door, whiskey loud and spoiling for excitement. "Well, look here. Miller's got himself some real live savages in the store," the leader announced, spitting tobacco juice dangerously close to the carefully arranged trade goods. Sarah recognized trouble immediately. "Gentlemen, we're conducting business. Perhaps you could return later." "Business? With these redskins?" The cowboy lurched forward, deliberately shoving one of the younger Apache men. What kind of white woman speaks for Indians? In one fluid motion, Sarah moved between them, her substantial frame blocking the cowboy's advance. The kind who won't tolerate disruption in her father's store. The man reached for her arm, but Sarah caught his wrist in a grip, hardened by years of hauling merchandise. "I suggest you leave," she said quietly, applying just enough pressure to make the drunk cowboy wince. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Takoda watching the interaction, his hand no longer on his medicine pouch, but hovering near the knife at his belt. "You're choosing them over your own kind," the cowboy snarled. "I'm choosing civilized behavior over drunken foolishness," Sarah replied, steering him firmly toward the door. "Come back when you're sober." After the cowboys were expelled, an uncomfortable silence filled the store. Sarah returned to the trading table, straightening goods that had been disturbed in the commotion. "You have strong hands," Takoda observed. "Too strong, most would say," Sarah responded automatically. "There is no such thing as too strong when defending what is right," Takoda said, his dark eyes holding hers for a moment that stretched beyond propriety. "My people would understand this." When the trading concluded and the Apache prepared to depart, Takoda paused at the door. "We will return in 2 weeks' time. Perhaps then you will tell me the names of the plants you keep hidden behind your counter, the ones you recognized from our medicine." Sarah stood speechless as he mounted his horse and led his people away, wondering how he had noticed what no one else ever had. Her careful collection of healing herbs gathered during solitary walks beyond town. "Dealing with savages will be the ruin of this store," Thomas Miller muttered, staring at the dwindling customers, browsing their shelves. 3 days had passed since the Apache trading session, and gossip had worked its poison through Copper Creek. Sarah continued tallying the day's meager receipts. "Their business kept us afloat this month. Their business is driving away respectable folks," her father countered, pulling his flask from an inner pocket. The door swung open with a bang, admitting Sheriff Burke and the banker, Miss Blackwood, a corpulent man whose expensive Eastern suit strained against his belly. "Miller," Blackwood nodded curtly. "Miss Miller, I understand you've been engaging in commerce with the Apache." "Legal commerce," Sarah replied. "The territorial governor's proclamation encourages peaceful trading relationships with cooperative tribes." The sheriff fingered his silver star badge, his symbol of authority gleaming against his dusty vest. "Cooperative is a matter of interpretation, Miss Miller. We've had reports of raids less than 50 miles from here." "Different band entirely," Sarah countered. "Chief Takoda's people have maintained the peace treaty for nearly 2 years. And how exactly would you know so much about which Indian is which?" Burke asked, eyes narrowing suspiciously. Before Sarah could respond, her father interjected, "My daughter reads too many newspapers. Fills her head with politics instead of proper womanly concerns." Blackwood's thin lips curled into what passed for a smile. "Speaking of proper concerns, Miller, your loan payment is overdue." Again, Thomas paled. "Just need another week. Cattle drives coming through should bring good business." "You've had extensions," Blackwood said coldly. "Perhaps if you focused on attracting desirable customers instead of entertaining hostiles." "The Apache paid in full, with no haggling," Sarah interjected. "More than I can say for half the accounts in our ledger." The banker's face flushed with anger. "Mind your place, woman. This is men's business." "This is family business," Sarah corrected. "And without my work there would be no business left to discuss." Sheriff Burke stepped between them, hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Now, let's all stay civil. I came with a warning, not looking for trouble." He turned to Sarah. "The territorial militia's been called up. There's talk of moving all Apache onto the reservation by year's end, peacefully or otherwise. But the treaties," Sarah began. "Treaties change," Burke interrupted, tapping his badge. "This doesn't. Law's the law. And soon the law will say no Indians off the reservation. You'd do well to remember which side of that line you stand on." After they departed, Thomas collapsed into a chair, hands trembling with the need for drink. We're finished. Blackwood will take everything. We still have 2 weeks until the next payment, Sarah said, already calculating what inventory they could sacrifice for quick sales. The whole town's turning against us, her father moaned. First your mother dying, then Eliza being the only girl her age not yet engaged, and now you practically socializing with savages. God is punishing me. Sarah bit back the sharp retort rising in her throat. I'll find a way, Father. I always do. The following Sunday, Sarah sat stiffly in the church pew, aware of the empty spaces surrounding her family, where neighbors once sat. Reverend Campbell's sermon focused ominously on Delilah's betrayal of Samson, with pointed glances toward the Miller pew. As the congregation filed out, Miss Peterson, the butcher's wife, brushed deliberately past Sarah. I hear some women actually find redskins handsome, she stage whispered to her companion. Usually the ones who can't attract a proper husband. Probably because she's built like a man herself, came the snickering reply. Buffalo Sarah, that's what my Harold calls her. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her face impassive despite the burning in her cheeks. She'd heard worse. The cruelty wasn't new, only the specific flavor of it. Eliza squeezed her hand. They're horrid. Don't listen. Miss Miller, Sheriff Burke appeared at her elbow as she exited the church. A word. He led her away from prying ears, his expression grave beneath his badge that caught the bright Sunday sunlight. There's a warrant from Fort Benton, he said quietly, for a renegade Apache who murdered a family near Tucson, young brave named Neshota. What has this to do with me? Sarah asked. Neshota is Dakota's cousin, Burke said. Your trading partner harbors a killer. Sarah kept her face carefully neutral. You have proof of this connection. Army scouts confirmed it. His eyes narrowed. When Dakota returns, I expect you to notify me immediately. No warning him. No private conversations. Am I understood? Perfectly, Sheriff. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Though I wonder why you assume he'll return at all. Because men like that are creatures of habit, Burke replied, tapping his badge meaningfully. And because he seemed mighty interested in something here in Copper Creek. The way his eyes lingered on her face made his implication clear. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm spring day. Be careful where your sympathies lie, Miss Miller, Burke added. This town has long memories. As he walked away, Sarah noticed a group of men gathered outside the saloon, watching her with hostile eyes. Among them stood Blackwood, deep in conversation with the drunken cowboys who had disrupted the trading days earlier. The walls were closing in, and Sarah realized with sudden clarity that more than the family store was at stake in the coming days. The badge that once represented protection now felt like a target fixed squarely on anyone who stood outside the town's narrowing definition of loyalty. The day of Dakota's promised return dawned with an uneasy stillness. Sarah rose before sunrise, rawning the store's trading area with methodical precision. She'd prepared a detailed inventory of items the Apache might value, focusing on practical goods, rather than the colored beads and trinkets most traders offered. You're wasting your time, Thomas Miller said, watching her work. They won't come back, not with the militia stirring up trouble. They gave their word, Sarah replied simply. By mid-morning, the street outside remained conspicuously empty of Apache visitors. Instead, a small group of townsmen had gathered at the saloon across the way, occasionally casting glances toward the general store. Sheriff Burke made a point of riding past twice, his badge catching the sunlight as he tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Her father said triumphantly around noon, "Even savages know when they're not welcome." Sarah continued her regular duties, ignoring the hollow feeling in her chest. She told herself it was merely disappointment over lost business opportunities, nothing more. The afternoon brought a sudden dust storm, driving most people indoors. As visibility cleared toward evening, Sarah looked up from sweeping the porch to find Chief Dakota standing before her, alone and unannounced. He'd approached from the creek side, avoiding the main road through town. "You came," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "I said I would." His eyes scanned the street, though perhaps with less company than expected. Sarah glanced around nervously. It's not safe. The sheriff. I am aware of the changing winds. Dakota interrupted. My scouts report increased military movement. This is why I come alone. She hesitated, then gestured him inside, quickly closing the door behind them. Her father had gone to settle accounts with the cattle buyers, leaving her to mind the store alone. What you risk by coming here, Sarah began, is my choice to make, Dakota finished. He studied her face. You look troubled. Sarah considered the sheriff's warnings, her promise to report Dakota's arrival. Instead, she found herself asking, do you know a man called Nashota? If the name surprised him, Dakota didn't show it. My cousin's son. He died 2 moons ago, in a raid, not by his choice, but forced by a renegade band that captured him. The army claims he murdered settlers, Sarah said carefully. The army claims many things, Dakota replied. They do not mention that Nashota was taken from our village by force, or that he was 17 summers old. His expression remained controlled, but grief flickered in his eyes. He was to be a healer, not a warrior. Sarah felt the weight of this information settle between them. I was told to report your arrival to the sheriff, and yet you haven't run to do so. Dakota moved deeper into the store, running his fingers over a bolt of indigo cloth. Why? Because I've learned that the first story I hear is rarely the complete truth, she answered honestly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You would have made a good Apache. An unexpected warmth bloomed in her chest at the simple compliment. Sarah busied herself gathering the items they'd discussed during the previous trading session. I cannot stay long, Dakota said, watching her efficient movements, but I brought what was promised. He produced a small leather pouch containing fair payment for the goods. As Sarah recorded the transaction in the ledger, he added, I have also brought something else. From within his vest, Dakota withdrew a silver pendant on a leather cord, an arrowhead of exquisite craftsmanship, its edges softened by generations of handling. My grandfather made this, he explained, holding it toward her. In our tradition, it offers protection to those who walk dangerous paths between worlds. Sarah stared at the pendant, understanding the significance of such a gift. I cannot accept this. You already stand between your people and mine, Dakota said quietly, and I fear the path grows more treacherous. He stepped closer, the pendant glinting in his palm. Take it. If nothing else, consider it payment for your discretion today. With trembling fingers, Sarah accepted the arrow. It felt warm against her skin, heavy with meaning she couldn't fully comprehend. The military has ordered all Apache to the reservation by summer's end, she warned. The sheriff says there will be no exceptions. Dakota's expression hardened. So they have said before, and before that time, promising it will be the last piece of land they take. He gestured to the pendant now in her hand. We have survived by understanding when to fight and when to adapt, but we will not surrender our freedom. The sound of horses outside interrupted them. Sarah quickly concealed the pendant in her pocket. My father, she whispered urgently. You must go through the back storeroom. Dakota paused at the rear door. When the storm comes, remember you have friends among my people. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Strong women are valued by the Apache, Sarah Miller. After he vanished into the gathering dusk, Sarah stood motionless, his words echoing in her mind. Later, alone in her room, she examined the silver arrowhead by candlelight, tracing its intricate patterns with her fingertip. She'd been given many things in her life, duties, burdens, responsibilities. Never before had she received a gift that celebrated her strength rather than overlooking it. The promissory note sat on the kitchen table between them, its official bank seal mocking their desperate circumstances. Thomas Miller had finally revealed the full extent of their financial troubles, 3 missed payments with foreclosure imminent. 2 weeks, her father said hoarsely. Blackwood says it's his final extension. Sarah studied the document, the formal language disguising a simple truth. They would lose everything. The amount is more than I calculated, Where did these additional fees come from? Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. Interest, and some personal loans. For whiskey, Sarah stated flatly. Her father's silence was confirmation enough. Even if we sell half our inventory at full price, we can't raise this sum, Sarah said, the reality settling heavily on her shoulders. Eliza, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. What about Erster Blackwood's offer to me? Sarah's head snapped up. What offer? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Nothing worth discussing. He suggested that if I were to accept his attentions, Eliza said carefully, he might be more lenient about the loan terms. He's nearly 50, Sarah exclaimed, disgust evident in her voice. And we're nearly destitute, her father countered. Eliza could do worse than becoming the banker's wife. She's 19, father. Mr. Blackwood has buried 2 wives already. Perhaps I should decide for myself, Eliza said with unexpected firmness. We're discussing my future after all. Sarah stared at her sister, seeing for the first time not the delicate girl who needed protection, but a young woman facing impossible choices. Do you want to marry him? Eliza paled. No, but I want even less to see us homeless, or you working yourself to death trying to save us. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The promissory note between them represented more than mere debt. It was the culmination of their father's failures, the town's prejudices, and the narrowing options for 2 unmarried women in a frontier society. There must be another way, Sarah insisted, though her usual practical nature offered no immediate solutions. Thomas suddenly looked up, his bloodshot eyes widening at something beyond the window. Indians, he hissed. Sarah turned to see Chief Takoda approaching their home, alone and unarmed. Her hand instinctively went to the silver arrowhead pendant hidden beneath her high-necked dress. What's he doing here? Thomas demanded. Coming to our house? Stay calm, Sarah cautioned, moving toward the door. Let me handle this. Outside, Takoda waited respectfully at the property line. He had exchanged his usual buckskins for a more formal appearance, a clean white shirt beneath a traditional vest, his long hair tied back with a leather cord. Chief Takoda, Sarah acknowledged, keenly aware of neighbors watching from windows. Miss Miller, he replied with equal formality, I must speak with your father on a matter of importance. Sarah hesitated, glancing back at the house where Thomas now stood, in the doorway, nervously straightening his rumpled clothing. Please, Takoda added quietly, it concerns the future of both our peoples. She led him inside, where Thomas offered a stiff greeting and Eliza a shy nod. The promissory note remained on the table, its presence unavoidable. What brings you to our home, Chief Takoda? Thomas asked, attempting dignity despite his trembling hands. Takoda's gaze lingered briefly on the bank document before addressing Thomas directly. I come with a proposal, one that could benefit your family and ensure peace between my people and the settlers of Copper Creek. We're listening, Sarah said when her father remained silent. The military speaks of forcing us onto the reservation, Takoda continued. But there are other paths. If we could establish formal trade agreements with businesses in town, demonstrate our value to the community, perhaps we could remain on our ancestral lands. Thomas frowned. What does this have to do with us? I propose a more permanent alliance between your family and my people, Takoda said carefully. A union that would bring prosperity to your store and protection to my tribe. What kind of union? Sarah asked, something in his tone making her pulse quicken. Takoda turned to face her fully. Marriage, he said simply, between myself and your daughter. The room fell absolutely silent. Thomas stared in disbelief while Eliza's eyes widened. That's absurd, Thomas finally sputtered. My Eliza would never. I meant your elder daughter, Takoda interrupted, his gaze steady on Sarah, the one with strength and wisdom to bridge our worlds. Sarah felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. This is outrageous, Thomas began, but Takoda continued, addressing Sarah directly. Among my people, you would be respected as a chief's wife. Your knowledge of plants, your courage, your strength, all would be valued, not mocked. His eyes flickered briefly to the promissory note. "And your family's position in town would be secured through our alliance. You can't seriously expect," Thomas started. "What terms?" Sarah interrupted, ignoring her father's sputtering. Dakota outlined his proposal with the same precision he brought to trading: generous payment that would clear the family's debts, guaranteed exclusive trading rights between the tribe and town, protection for the Miller store and family. When he finished, Thomas looked conflicted, greed warring with prejudice. "My daughter isn't some trade good." "No," Dakota agreed. "She is a woman of value, whose worth this town has failed to recognize." He turned to Sarah. "I offer not ownership but partnership. You would lose nothing of yourself in joining my people, except everything familiar," Sarah said quietly. "Including ridicule and limitation," Dakota countered. Sarah's fingers found the hidden pendant at her neck. The choice before her seemed impossible, yet somehow, in its impossibility, it offered what she had never dared hope for: a path to somewhere she might truly belong. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Dakota nodded. "One day, I will return tomorrow for your answer." He rose to leave, then added, "Among the Apache, the strongest women become our leaders' wives, not because they need protection, but because the tribe needs their strength." After he departed, Thomas collapsed into a chair. "This can't be happening. It might be our only option," Eliza said softly, staring at the promissory note. Sarah stood by the window, watching Dakota's retreating figure. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen not an oddity to be tolerated, but a strength to be valued. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Sarah knelt beside her mother's grave as dawn painted the hillside cemetery in gentle gold. The small locket, in her palm, contained the only family portrait they'd ever taken. Her mother seated, surrounded by Thomas, 10-year-old Sarah, and baby Eliza. It had been her mother's most treasured possession. "I don't know what to do," Sarah whispered to the weathered headstone. "What would you advise your too tall, too strong daughter now?" The cemetery remained silent except for morning birdsong. Sarah tried to imagine her mother's voice. Her wisdom, Elizabeth Miller, had always found practical solutions to life's challenges, facing frontier hardships with quiet determination. "He sees value in what others mock," Sarah continued. "But he's Apache, Mother. His world is entirely different from ours." The thought of leaving everything familiar, however painful that familiarity sometimes was, terrified her. Yet remaining meant watching her sister potentially sacrificed to Blackwood, witnessing her father's continued decline, and enduring a lifetime of sidelong glances and whispered ridicule. "Sarah?" Eliza's voice called softly. Her sister picked her way between gravestones, her delicate features tight with concern. "I thought I'd find you here." Sarah pocketed the locket as Eliza settled beside her on the damp grass. "Father's still asleep," Eliza said. "The shock and whiskey together. He'll have plenty to say when he wakes," Sarah replied grimly. Eliza plucked at the grass. "You're considering it, aren't you? Chief Dakota's proposal. I'm considering all our options." "There aren't many," Eliza said bluntly. "Blackwood wants the store location. Even if we somehow paid the current debt, he'd find ways to demand more." Sarah nodded. The banker's desire for their prime commercial property was an open secret, and if you refused Dakota, Eliza pressed, "then I watch you marry Blackwood, or we lose everything and become charity cases, if anyone would even take us in." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only when Eliza reached for Sarah's hand. "I've watched you disappear a little more each day in this town," she said quietly. "Folding yourself smaller, hunching your shoulders, speaking less in public, trying to be invisible when you were made to stand tall." Sarah couldn't deny it. Years of mockery had taught her to minimize her presence, to apologize with her body language for taking up too much space. "When Chief Dakota looks at you," Eliza continued, "he sees you. All of you. I watched his face yesterday. There was respect there, Sarah. Perhaps more. It's a practical arrangement, Sarah objected. A political alliance. Perhaps, Eliza conceded, but he could have proposed marriage to any settler's daughter. He chose you. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through Sarah's chest. She quickly suppressed it. What about you? She asked. If I go, you and Father would be alone. Father made his choices, Eliza said with surprising hardness. As for me, the dressmaker's apprenticeship is still open. Mrs. Henderson offered again last week. Sarah stared at her sister in surprise. You never mentioned that, because I knew you'd insist on sacrificing yourself here instead, Eliza replied. You've been protecting me since Mother died, Sarah. Perhaps it's time I stood on my own. They sat together as the sun climbed higher, the town below gradually coming to light. From this distance, Copper Creek looked peaceful, even welcoming, its harsh judgments and narrow expectations invisible. Do you think I could survive among his people? Sarah finally asked. I think you might do more than survive, Eliza answered. You might finally live. The walk back to town gave Sarah time to strengthen her resolve. She found her father in the kitchen, nursing coffee and a headache, the promissory note still lying where they'd left it. We need to discuss Chief Takoda's offer, she began. Thomas grimaced. There's nothing to discuss. I was addled with shock yesterday, even listening to such nonsense. It's not nonsense, Father. It's a viable solution to our problems. My daughter married to a savage? I'd rather see the store burn to the ground. Sarah's patience, stretched thin by months of watching him drink away their livelihood, finally snapped. Then you'll also watch Eliza forced to marry Blackwood. Or worse. Is that preferable? At least Takoda offers respect. You know nothing about those people, Thomas argued. I know they value strength instead of mocking it. I know they honor their agreements instead of drowning their promises in whiskey. Sarah laid a hand on the promissory note. I know this debt exists because of your choices, not mine. Yet I'm offering a way to fix. Thomas seemed to deflate before her eyes, anger giving way to the broken man beneath. What would your mother say? Sarah touched the locket in her pocket. She told me to find someone who sees my strength as a blessing, not a burden. The memory brought surprising clarity. I believe she'd tell me to save our family and find my own path, even if that path leads away from Copper Creek. Her father stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. You've made your decision, then? Sarah nodded, a strange calm settling over her. When Chief Takoda returns today, I'll accept his proposal, on one condition, that Eliza receives the apprenticeship she deserves, with the dressmaker's fees paid from my marriage settlement. By the time Takoda arrived that afternoon, Sarah had packed her few belongings and made her peace with the choice before her. Whatever awaited her, among the Apache, she would face it standing tall, no longer apologizing for the strength that had carried her family for so long. She touched the locket once more before tucking it safely among her possessions. Some connections would travel with her, even as she forged a path her mother could never have imagined. The church stood small and white against the vast Arizona sky, its weathered clapboards bearing witness to countless weddings, funerals, and baptisms. Today it would host a ceremony unprecedented in Copper Creek's brief history. Reverend Campbell's reluctance had required the territorial judge's intervention, a reminder that no law forbade marriage between settlers and Indians, however distasteful the reverend might find it. The minister's thin lips remained pressed in disapproval as Sarah entered the church wearing her mother's blue shawl, its embroidered flowers framing her face. You don't have to go through with this, Eliza whispered, adjusting the shawl's folds. We could still find another way. Sarah squeezed her sister's hand. This is the way. The church pews held more spectators than Sarah had anticipated. Not well-wishers, their avid expressions betrayed curiosity, disapproval, even morbid fascination. Mrs. Peterson leaned toward her companion, whispering behind her gloved hand. The banker, Blackwood, sat scowling near the back. Sheriff Burke stood against the wall, hand resting near his holstered pistol, ostensibly keeping peace, but watching Takoda with open suspicion. Takoda himself stood before the altar, a commanding presence despite the foreign setting. He had dressed in a formal buckskin shirt, adorned with intricate beadwork, his hair bound with a leather cord wrapped in silver wire. He met Sarah's eyes steadily as she walked down the aisle alone, her father having refused to give her away to a savage. Thomas Miller sat in the front pew, sober for the occasion, but slumped in defeat. The morning's transaction had cleared his debts. The promissory note now marked paid in Blackwood's spidery hand. Freedom from financial ruin had cost him his eldest daughter. Dearly beloved, Reverend Campbell began without warmth, we are gathered here today. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical efficiency, the Reverend rushing through the liturgy as if the words might burn his tongue. When he reached the objection question, he paused longer than necessary, eyes scanning the congregation hopefully. Sheriff Burke shifted his weight. Mrs. Peterson inhaled sharply, but no voice rose to prevent the union. I, Sarah Elizabeth Miller, take thee. Sarah's clear voice filled the church, unwavering despite the whispers her confidence provoked. Her fingers gripped her mother's shawl for strength. When Takoda spoke his vows, his deep voice carried dignity and certainty. He had requested to include Apache words of commitment, but the Reverend had refused. Instead, Takoda had added a single gesture, placing his hand over his heart when promising to protect and honor. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, the Reverend concluded with palpable doubt. No applause followed their brief kiss, only murmurs and the rustle of clothing as the congregation shifted uncomfortably. As they turned to face the church, Sarah caught Eliza's tearful smile and her father's vacant stare. Outside, sunlight momentarily blinded Sarah as she stepped from the dim church. When her vision cleared, she found 4 Apache women waiting beside the horses, their expressions curious but not unkind. One, older than the others, with silver streaking her dark hair, stepped forward to offer Sarah a clay water vessel decorated with geometric patterns. For your journey, the woman said in accented English. I am Nami Mana, mother of Takoda. Sarah accepted the vessel with appropriate gravity. Thank you for welcoming me. Nami Mana's weathered face revealed nothing, but her eyes assessed Sarah thoroughly. My son chooses with his eyes open. We will see if you do the same. The loading of Sarah's few possessions onto a pack horse took little time. Her father approached awkwardly, sobriety making him almost a stranger. You have your mother's Bible, he asked, his first words to her since the ceremony. Sarah nodded, and her locket. And your family name, unless you wish me to surrender it. Thomas flinched. You're still a Miller, whatever else you become. He hesitated, then added gruffly, your mother would have been braver about this than I've been. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to receive. Sarah allowed him a brief embrace, the familiar smells of tobacco and store dust catching in her throat. Eliza's farewell proved harder. The sisters clung to each other, years of shared secrets and mutual protection distilled into one fierce hug. Right when you can, Eliza whispered, and remember, you're not sacrificing yourself, you're finding a new path. When Sarah approached the waiting horses, the town's collective gaze burned her back. She felt the weight of their judgment, their certainty that she was making a monstrous mistake, or worse, revealing a defect of character they had suspected. Takoda extended his hand toward his bride, presumably to help her mount behind him on his horse. Sarah hesitated, then turned instead to the saddled mare that had been prepared for her belongings. I can ride, she said, swinging herself capably into the saddle and arranging her skirts. The Apache women exchanged glances, and Sarah thought she detected approval in Nehomana's slight nod. Takoda mounted his own horse without comment, though something like respect flickered in his eyes. As the wedding party moved away from the church, Sarah adjusted her mother's shawl around her shoulders and refused to look back at Copper Creek. Whatever awaited her among the Apache, respect or rejection, freedom or another form of confinement, she rode toward it with her spine straight and her head high, the embroidered flowers surrounding her like her mother's final blessing. The journey to Dakota's village traced pathways invisible to untrained eyes. They followed game trails, dry creek beds, and narrow passes through rocky terrain that Sarah would have deemed impassable before witnessing the Apache riders navigate them with casual confidence. 3 days into their journey, Sarah's body ached from hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. The Apache women, Nahamana, Kimi, Aponi, and young Helena watched her with measuring gazes. Sarah understood this unspoken test and met it with quiet determination, accepting discomfort as the price of respect. They made camp as twilight gathered in a sheltered canyon where cottonwood trees surrounded a small spring. The women moved with practiced efficiency, establishing the camp while Dakota and 2 warriors who had joined them as escorts ranged outward, securing the perimeter. Sarah dismounted stiffly, then immediately began caring for her mare, before tending to her own needs, an action that earned a nod from Nahimana. "You understand horses," the older woman observed. "My father traded them before opening the store," Sarah replied, rubbing down the mare's sweaty flanks. "I learned early that animals remember who treats them well." Later, as Sarah gathered kindling near the spring, her foot dislodged something in the soft earth. Bending down, she discovered a perfectly formed obsidian arrowhead, its gleaming black surface unmarred by time. She turned it carefully in her palm, wondering about the hands that had crafted it generations ago. "A good sign," said Aponi, appearing silently beside her. The woman, perhaps a few years older than Sarah, had spoken little during their journey. "When the ancestors leave gifts, they welcome you to the land." Sarah offered the arrowhead, but Aponi shook her head. "It came to your hands. The blessing is for you." That evening, seated around the small fire, Sarah experienced her first real conversation with her new family. The initial silence gradually yielded to practical questions. Could she cook? Sew? Did she know plants? What skills did white women learn? Sarah answered honestly, neither diminishing nor exaggerating her abilities. When she mentioned her knowledge of accounts and figures, Dakota looked up from where he sat slightly apart. "This is valuable," he said. "The traders cheat us because they believe we cannot count. They cheat you because they can," Sarah corrected. "Not because you lack understanding." A charged silence followed her bluntness. Then Nahana made a sound suspiciously like a chuckle. "She has a warrior's tongue," the older woman remarked to her son in their language, which Sarah was beginning to recognize if not comprehend. Dakota responded with words Sarah couldn't understand, but his tone carried respect rather than rebuke. As the women prepared food, Sarah joined them without being asked, learning through observation the proper way to flatten dough for bread cooked on hot stones. Her large, strong hands proved adept at the task, earning grudging approval. "White women fear calluses," Kimi commented, noticing Sarah's work-roughened palms. "Some do," Sarah agreed. "Others cannot afford such fears." The meal finished, Helena, barely 16, approached Sarah with shy curiosity. "Is it true white women sleep in cages of whale bones?" Sarah blinked in confusion before understanding dawned. "You mean corsets? Not all women wear them, especially not on the frontier." She smiled, though some might say they're prisons just the same. This exchange opened a flood of questions about white customs, many revealing amusing misconceptions. Sarah answered with patience, increasingly aware of how strange her former life must seem to these women. As the conversation continued, Sarah noticed Dakota watching her, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met across the fire, he didn't look away. There was something unnerving in his steady gaze, not impiety, but assessment, as if he were still deciding whether his choice had been wise. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Sarah found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since their wedding. The others had arranged sleeping spaces with deliberate discretion, creating the illusion of privacy within the small camp. Dakota sat beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. "You ride well," he observed, "and you do not complain of hardship." "Complaining changes nothing," Sarah replied. "Better to endure and learn." He nodded, then asked with unexpected directness, "Do you fear what awaits in the village?" Sarah considered the question, turning the obsidian arrowhead in her fingers. "I fear being forever a stranger," she admitted, "neither belonging to your world nor mine." "The path between worlds is never easy," Takoda acknowledged, "but those who walk it can see truths others cannot." He gestured to the arrowhead, "Like finding what lies beneath the surface." In the firelight, his features seemed both foreign and increasingly familiar. Not handsome by white standards, but striking strength and intelligence evident in every line of his face. "We will reach the village tomorrow," he said, rising. "Rest well, Sarah Miller." As he moved away, Sarah realized it was the first time he had spoken her name. The simple sound of it in his voice lingered as she wrapped herself in blankets beneath the vast desert sky. The obsidian arrowhead clutched in her palm like a talisman against uncertainty. "The village lies beyond the next ridge," Takoda announced as they traveled through a narrow canyon, its walls rising like sentinels on either side. Sarah nodded, her stomach knotting with anticipation. After 4 days of journey, the abstract concept of living among the Apache would soon become concrete reality. They emerged from the canyon into a valley cradled by mountains, where cottonwood and willow trees marked the course of a small river. The Apache village spread along its banks, not the disorganized collection of crude shelters Sarah had been led to expect by frontier tales, but an ordered community of dome-shaped wickiups and larger family dwellings, with horses corralled nearby and garden plots visible in the fertile soil. Activity ceased as they approached. Women paused in their work, children stopped playing, and men gathered to observe the return of their chief, with his white bride. The weight of hundreds of evaluating eyes pressed upon Sarah, their gazes neither hostile nor welcoming, simply watchful, reserving judgment. Takoda led them into the center of the village, where an open area served as a gathering place. He dismounted with fluid grace, then turned to assist Sarah. Though she had managed independently throughout their journey, she understood this moment held ceremonial significance and accepted his hand, standing tall beside him as he addressed his people in their language. Sarah recognized her name amid the flowing words, and something that must have been an introduction. Murmurs rippled through the assembled tribe. Some faces registered curiosity, others skepticism, a few outright disapproval. A man stepped forward, younger than Takoda, but with a similar proud bearing. He spoke rapidly, his tone challenging though not openly hostile. "My brother Enapai questions whether a white woman can truly become Apache." Takoda translated, his expression revealing nothing of his own opinion on the matter. Before Sarah could respond, Nahemanon intervened with sharp words that silenced the younger man. Whatever she said carried authority that even Enapai respected. "Come," Nahemana said to Sarah in English, "you will rest in my dwelling until the welcome ceremony." The rest proved to be anything but. Inside Nahemana's spacious wickiup, Sarah found herself surrounded by curious women, some Takoda's relatives and others prominent tribal members. While offering food and water, they studied her with undisguised interest, her height, her build, her sun-reddened skin, and especially her auburn hair, which several women touched with fascinated fingers. "They have many questions," Nahemana explained, "but first, you must be properly dressed." From a painted wooden chest, she withdrew a deerskin dress unlike anything Sarah had seen before. The soft leather had been worked to buttery smoothness, decorated with intricate beadwork depicting mountains, stars, and flowing water. Fringe adorned the sleeves and hem, each strand tipped with tiny cone-shaped bells that whispered with movement. "This is too fine," Sarah protested, touching the garment reverently. "I cannot accept." "It is not a gift but a necessity," Nahemana interrupted. "A chief's wife cannot appear before the tribe in the clothes of the enemy." Sarah flinched at the word enemy but understood the message. Her calico travel dress represented the world that had pushed the Apache from their lands. To be accepted, she must visibly leave that identity behind. The women helped her change, exclaiming over her corset, which Sarah had worn for the wedding and journey, despite its discomfort, and insisting she remove it completely. "How do you breathe in such a cage?" asked Kimmy, examining the whalebone stays with bewilderment. "Not well," Sarah admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable as the structured garment was removed. Yet when she donned the deerskin dress, she experienced an unexpected sense of liberation. The soft leather moved with her body rather than restricting it, the weight comfortable on her shoulders. A young woman named Lila Yu approached with small clay pots containing pigments. "For the ceremony," she explained hesitantly in English. "Your face must show your new family." Sarah submitted to having symbols painted on her cheeks and forehead, vertical lines representing rain, Nahimana explained, and a circle for the sun. "Strength and life," the older woman said. "What my son saw in you." As twilight approached, drums began to pulse outside. Nahimana arranged a final touch, a band of beadwork for Sarah's hair from which hung a single eagle feather. "Now you are ready," she declared, though her eyes still held reservation. "Remember, stand straight, speak true, and show no fear. The people respect courage above all." Sarah emerged from the Whisky to find the village gathered around a central fire. Takoda, dressed in ceremonial attire, waited with tribal elders. His eyes widened slightly at her transformation, a reaction that sent unexpected warmth through Sarah's chest. The deerskin dress whispered around her legs as she walked forward, the tiny bells creating gentle music with each step. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt no need to hunch her shoulders or minimize her height. Among these people, strength was not a flaw to be hidden, but a virtue to be displayed. As she took her place beside Takoda, the drumming intensified. The ceremony to welcome her, or reject her, had begun. Sarah stood tall, the dress a second skin reminding her that identities could be shed and remade, like the snake designs she had noticed woven into its beaded patterns. Behind her lay the boundaries of Copper Creek, before her stretched the unknown territory of her new life. The first week in the Apache village tested everything Sarah thought she knew about herself. Her strength, considerable in Copper Creek, proved barely adequate for the physical demands of tribal life. Her knowledge, once a source of quiet pride, revealed gaping holes when applied to this new world. Yet Sarah met each challenge with the same stubborn determination that had sustained her through years of mockery. Her days followed the rhythms of the women's work, grinding corn into meal, preparing food, tending garden plots, collecting water from the river, and processing hides. The latter task proved especially challenging, requiring specialized skills Sarah had never developed. "Not like this," said Talita, the village's most skilled hide tanner, demonstrating the proper scraping technique for the 5th time. "You waste too much." Sarah adjusted her grip, trying to mimic the older woman's efficient movement. Her palms blistered, then coolized, her muscles ached in unfamiliar ways, but gradually she improved. She met each correction with careful attention rather than defensiveness, earning grudging respect from her teachers. Nights brought different trials. She and Takoda shared a dwelling at the village edge, large by tribal standards, with separate sleeping areas divided by woven reed screens. Their marriage remained unconsummated, a fact that prompted whispers among the women, but seemed to cause Takoda no concern. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, neither pressing for intimacy nor rejecting her presence. "When you choose to be Apache," he had explained, "then you choose me as husband in truth. Not before." Sarah appreciated his patience, even as she wondered if it masked regret. Their conversations, limited by language barriers, but growing more substantive as Sarah learned basic Apache words, revealed a man of greater complexity than she had initially perceived, thoughtful, sometimes humorous, deeply committed to his people's welfare. On her 8th day, Masqua, the tribe's elderly healer, appeared at their dwelling with a request that Takoda translated. "He wishes you to show him the plants you know," Takoda explained. He has heard of your knowledge. Sarah followed the stooped healer to the river's edge, where he gestured at the vegetation with gnarled hands, raising questioning eyebrows. Drawing on her lifetime of solitary plant-gathering excursions, Sarah identified what she recognized: herbs for fever, roots that soothed stomach ailments, leaves that could be poulticed on wounds. Masqua listened intently, occasionally nodding when her knowledge aligned with tribal wisdom, other times shaking his head and demonstrating superior alternatives. To Sarah's surprise, he seemed genuinely interested in her contributions rather than merely testing her. After several hours of this exchange, Masqua reached into his medicine pouch and withdrew a knife, its blade meticulously honed, its handle crafted from polished bone inscribed with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. For gathering, Tekoda, translated as the healer, pressed it into her hands. He says your fingers understand plants. They speak to you. Sarah accepted the knife with appropriate solemnity, recognizing it as both tool and symbol, not a decorative gift like the ceremonial dress, but a practical acknowledgement of her potential usefulness to the tribe. That evening, a commotion near the central sire drew Sarah from her dwelling. A hunting party had returned bearing an injured warrior, blood soaked through hasty bandages on his thigh where a cornered elk had gored him. Masqua hurried forward, but his arthritic hands struggled with the wrappings. Without thinking, Sarah knelt beside him, using her new knife to cut away the blood-soaked fabric. The wounded man, Apache, Tekoda's skeptical brother, flinched at her touch. "Be still," she told him in careful Apache, meeting his pained glare with steady eyes. "I help Masqua." The healer nodded approval as Sarah exposed the wound, deep but clean. Working together, they washed the injury with boiled water, infused with herbs, applied a poultice, and bound it with fresh bandages. Throughout the procedure, Sarah's strong hands proved steadier than the elderly healer's, her height and reach allowing her to work without strain. When they finished, Apache studied her with confusion, rather than his usual suspicion. "Why?" he asked, in halting English. Sarah understood. He questioned why a white woman would help an Apache who had shown her nothing but distrust. She considered her answer carefully, aware that many in the tribe watched this exchange. "Your blood is my husband's blood," she replied simply. "Your people, my people now." That night, Tekoda broke their usual silence as they prepared for sleep. "You helped my brother well," he observed. "Masqua says your hands are strong but gentle, good for healing." "In Copper Creek they called them Manish," Sarah said, examining her work-roughened palms in the firelight. "Too large for a proper woman." "Apache have no proper women," Tekoda replied. "Only useful ones and useless ones." His eyes held hers across the fire. "You become more useful each day." The words might have sounded cold to white ears, but Sarah recognized the significant compliment they represented. In a world where survival depended on each person's contribution, usefulness outweighed sentiment. Her worth here would be measured not by conformity to artificial standards of femininity, but by tangible value brought to the community. Later, alone on her sleeping mat, Sarah turned the bone-handled knife in her fingers. Its weight felt right in her hand, like a key unlocking a door to belonging. Not through marriage alone, but through service would she find her place among these people. The realization brought both clarity and challenge as she drifted toward sleep, the knife tucked safely beside her, its blade catching the dying firelight like a promise. "The woman uses a bow." The warrior named Halaku made no effort to hide his disapproval, as Tekoda placed the weapon in Sarah's hands. They stood at the village edge where several men practiced their archery, sending arrows into targets of bundled grass. "My wife learns all things necessary for survival," Tekoda replied calmly. "What if raiders come when men are hunting? Should she wait to die because tradition says women do not shoot?" This practical reasoning silenced, but did not convince Halaku, who moved away with a disapproving grunt. Others watched with expressions ranging from amusement to curiosity, as Tekoda positioned himself behind Sarah, adjusting her grip on the bow. "Like this," he instructed, his chest almost touching her back as he guided her arms into proper alignment. Draw with your shoulder, not just your arm. Sarah focused on the unfamiliar weapon, trying to ignore both the audience and the unusual closeness of her husband. After 3 weeks in the village, they had settled into a respectful coexistence, but physical proximity remained rare between them. The bow's resistance surprised her as she drew the string back. Her strength, sufficient for most tasks, met its match in the tightly strung sinew. "I cannot pull it fully," she admitted. "This is a warrior's bow," Takoda explained. "We will make one suited to your strength until your muscles develop." The qualification "until" rather than "if" caught Sarah's attention. Takoda expected her to persist, to grow stronger, not to abandon the skill as too masculine or difficult. For the next hour he patiently demonstrated the fundamentals of archery, correcting her stance and technique. Sarah's first attempts sent arrows embarrassingly wide of the target, eliciting poorly concealed snickers from observing warriors. Again Takoda instructed after each miss, his voice neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply expectant. By the session's end, Sarah had managed to hit the outer edge of the target twice. A modest achievement, but the satisfaction it brought surprised her. She had never before been permitted physical prowess in any form. "Tomorrow we continue," Takoda said as they walked back toward the village center. "The men do not approve," Sarah observed. "Some do not," he acknowledged. "Others understand. The world changes around us. We must adapt or perish." That evening, as Sarah joined the women preparing the communal meal, she braced for ridicule about her archery lesson. Instead, she found unexpected allies. "My grandmother used a bow," said Lily as she expertly sliced venison. "Before the white soldiers came, when our territory was larger, some women hunted alongside men." "It is good to have many skills," agreed Apache. "My sister's husband was killed by Navajo raiders. She and her children nearly starved because she could not hunt." Even Kimmy, who had maintained cool distance from the white woman in their midst, offered grudging support. Better to shoot badly than to starve properly. Later, tending the cooking fire, Sarah found herself approached by Nahimana. "My son teaches you our ways," the older woman observed. "But have you shown him yours?" Sarah looked up in surprise. "I assumed no one wanted white ways here." "Knowledge is not white or Apache, it simply is," Nahimana replied. "Your numbers and letters, these have power in the changing world. Perhaps you should teach those who wish to learn." The suggestion blossomed into reality the following day. While Takoda attended a council meeting, Sarah found herself surrounded by curious children, then women and eventually even a few men as she demonstrated basic arithmetic using sticks in the dirt. "Traders cheat because we cannot verify their counts," explained Apache, whose leg was healing well under Masqua and Sarah's care. "Show us how to prevent this." Sarah's impromptu school continued through the afternoon, her students quick to grasp concepts once the language barrier was navigated. Teaching came naturally to her, and for the first time since arriving, she felt truly useful, not just a curiosity or an obligation, but a contributor. When Takoda found her later, Sarah was helping Helena practice writing English words, using charcoal on a piece of scraped hide. "Your knowledge becomes the tribe's knowledge," he observed with approval. "As yours becomes mine," Sarah replied, nodding toward the bow he carried. A new one, smaller than his warrior's weapon, but beautifully crafted. "For you," he said, presenting it, "made to fit your arms." The bow was not merely a weapon, but a statement, Takoda publicly endorsing her unusual path. As Sarah accepted it, their fingers touched briefly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. That night, for the first time, they sat together after the evening meal, planning the next day's activities as a couple rather than leading separate lives that merely intersected at day's end. "The children learn quickly," Sarah noted, as they discussed her teaching. "As do you," Takoda replied. "Your Apache words improve. Your hands work like our women's now." "Not all welcome my presence," she admitted, thinking of Helaku's continuing coldness and the sidelong glances from some tribal members. Time changes many minds, Takoda said. Already you heal with Moskwa, teach our children, work without complaint. Even my brother speaks for you now in council. The revelation surprised Sarah. Inape defends me. Takoda's expression softened slightly, the closest he came to smiling. He says any woman who can split his skull with arithmetic and shoot a bow must be Apache in her heart if not her skin. The assessment, grudging but genuine, warmed Sarah more than outright praise might have. She ran her fingers along the smooth curve of her new bow, feeling its potential, not just as a weapon, but as a bridge between her past and future. Tomorrow I will hit the center of the target, she declared. Takoda's eyes held a new light as he regarded her across the fire. Believe you will. 6 months transformed Sarah in ways the mirror could not reflect. Her skin had darkened from constant outdoor life, her once soft hands now calloused and capable. She moved differently, with the balanced, quiet step of Apache women, and her English now carried the rhythmic cadence of those who thought first in another language. The morning began like many others, with Sarah joining Moskwa to gather healing plants along the river. The elderly healer's initial skepticism had evolved into genuine respect for her knowledge, and their working relationship had become one of mutual learning. Today they sought a particular route that helped prevent wound infections, valuable with hunting season approaching. This one, Sarah asked in Apache, indicating a plant with serrated leaves. Moskwa shook his head. Similar, but wrong. That brings stomach pain. Their peaceful work was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, too many and too heavy for returning hunters. Sarah straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun to see dust rising from the canyon entrance. Soldiers, Moskwa said grimly. They hurried back to warn the village, but riders had already spotted the settlement. By the time Sarah and Moskwa reached the central area, Takoda and the council elders had assembled to meet the approaching cavalry detachment. Stay with the women, Takoda instructed Sarah when she reached his side. She shook her head. They come from my world. Let me help you understand their words. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Stand beside me then. Let them see you choose to be here. The cavalry unit comprised 12 soldiers, led by a young lieutenant, whose freshly pressed uniform suggested recent arrival from the east. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Sarah in Apache dress, her hair braided in tribal style, standing confidently beside the chief. I am Lieutenant James Harrington, United States Cavalry, he announced, scanning the gathered Apache with obvious discomfort. I'm looking for Chief Takoda. I am Takoda, her husband replied in clear English, his dignity making the lieutenant appear boyish by comparison. The officer cleared his throat. I bring official orders from the territorial governor and the United States government. He withdrew a sealed document from his saddlebag. All Apache in this region are to relocate to the San Carlos Reservation within 30 days. Takoda accepted the letter but passed it to Sarah. My wife will read the white man's words. The lieutenant's composure faltered. Your wife, ma'am, are you being held here against your will? I am Sarah Miller, Lieutenant, she replied, deliberately using her maiden name as a erige between worlds. I married Chief Takoda 6 months ago and live here by choice. The young officer looked genuinely confused. But you seem white, Sarah supplied. Yes, and I read English very well. She broke the official seal and unfolded the document, scanning its contents with growing dismay. The letter outlined in cold, bureaucratic language the forced relocation of all non-reservation indigenous peoples to designated areas. Those who complied would receive basic provisions. Those who resisted would be considered hostile and removed by force. They claim this is for our protection, Sarah translated for Takoda. Switching to Apache, they say settlers are being attacked, though they name no specific incident. What is written between the lines? Takoda asked. Sarah understood his meaning. Mining interests have discovered silver in the eastern mountains. Our presence has become inconvenient. As she relayed the document's contents to the assembled tribe, murmurs of anger spread through the crowd. The San Carlos Reservation was notorious, barren land where other displaced tribes already struggled to survive. "This is our ancestral home," Takoda told the lieutenant. "We have honored all treaties. We trade peacefully with white settlement." "I have my orders, sir," the lieutenant replied stiffly. 30 days to comply." Apache stepped forward, his hand moving dangerously close to his knife. "And if we refuse?" The lieutenant's hand instinctively shifted toward his pistol. "Then I return with more men." Sarah intervened before tensions escalated further. "Lieutenant Harrington, surely the governor would consider special circumstances. This band has maintained peaceful relations with settlers for years." "The order applies to all Apache, ma'am," Harrington replied, though his tone softened slightly when addressing her. "No exceptions. Then we request a meeting with the governor," Sarah pressed, "as is our right under the Treaty of..." The lieutenant appeared startled by her specific knowledge of treaty provisions. "I would need to relay that request to my superiors." "Please do so," Sarah said firmly. "Tell them that Chief Takoda will travel to meet with the governor, accompanied by his wife, who happens to be the daughter of a territorial taxpayer and voter." As the soldiers departed, the tribe erupted in urgent discussion. Many advocated immediate relocation to their remote summer hunting grounds. Others argued for armed resistance. Takoda raised his hand for silence. "We will consider all paths," he said. "But first we must understand our true position." He turned to Sarah. "Tell me everything about this reservation, what you have heard, what you know." That evening by firelight, Sarah, Takoda and the tribal council spread an old trader's map on the ground. Sarah marked the reservation boundaries, explained the ration system, and outlined the legal frameworks, flimsy as they were, that might offer protection. "The letter gives us 30 days, Takoda observed. "We will use this time wisely." Later, in the privacy of their dwelling, Sarah finally asked the question that had troubled her all day. "What will happen to me if there is conflict?" Takoda studied her face in the firelight. "You are my wife, and of the people now. Your path is with us." "Even though I am white," she pressed. "6 moons ago, you were white," he replied. "Now you are Sarah of the Apache. Your hands heal our sick. Your bow feeds our children. Your mind outthinks our enemies." He touched her cheek with rare gentleness. "Your blood may be white, but your heart beats with our rhythm." The cavalry officer's letter lay between them, its broken seal like a wound in the firelight. Whatever came next, Sarah realized, she would face it not as an outsider caught between worlds, but as a woman who had finally found where she belonged. "The governor refuses to meet," Takoda announced to the tribal council gathered in the early dawn light. 2 weeks had passed since the cavalry's visit, with runners traveling between the village and Fort Wilson to negotiate. "His representative says the removal order stands without exception." Sarah studied the faces around the council fire, men and women, whose initial suspicion had gradually transformed into cautious acceptance of her presence. Now, in crisis, they looked to her as well as Takoda for guidance, her knowledge of white ways suddenly vital to their survival. "What options remain?" asked Nahemana, her weathered face grave. Sarah unfolded the trader's map that had become her constant companion. Its creased surface bore new markings: red ochre indicating military outposts, charcoal showing possible retreat routes, plant dye symbols marking water sources and defendable positions. 3 possibilities, she said, pointing to specific locations. "First, we can move deeper into the mountains where cavalry horses cannot easily follow. Second, we can split into smaller family groups, making it harder for soldiers to find everyone. Or third," she hesitated, knowing the sensitivity of her final suggestion, "we can attempt to secure legal protection through formal land claim." "Explain," Takoda prompted. "Under the Homestead Act, I could potentially file claim to this valley as a settler." Sarah explained. "As my husband, you would have legal right to remain on the property." Murmurs rippled through the council. The idea of using white man's law against him carried both appeal and insult. "And our people?" Innipe questioned. Would they be permitted to stay? As registered laborers, perhaps, Sarah admitted, but it would mean accepting certain restrictions. Becoming less Apache, Helaku said bitterly. Surviving to remain Apache, Takoda countered. A tree that cannot bend breaks in the storm. The debate continued as morning brightened into day. Each option weighed against traditional values and practical realities. Sarah remained largely silent after presenting the alternatives, aware that this decision must come from the tribe's heart, not her influence. By midday, consensus emerged. They would pursue multiple strategies simultaneously. Small scouting parties would explore mountain refuges, while Sarah would travel to Copper Creek to investigate legal options. The rest would prepare for either outcome while maintaining vigilance against military intervention. "I will accompany my wife," Takoda declared, ending discussion on that point before it began. Sarah spent the remainder of the day preparing for the journey, packing medicines, selecting appropriate clothing, and studying the map to plan their route. She would be returning to white society for the first time since her marriage, not as Sarah Miller, the overlarge spinster daughter, but as Sarah of the Apache, a chief's wife with purpose and confidence. As she rolled the map carefully into a protective leather case, Lilia approached with a small bundle. "For your journey," the young woman explained. "So you remember your home is with us now." Inside the bundle, Sarah found moccasins crafted in the tribe's distinctive style, but sized for her larger feet. The gesture touched her deeply, practical evidence of acceptance. That evening, as she and Takoda made final preparations, a scout burst into the village with alarming news. A larger cavalry detachment had been spotted only a day's ride away, accompanied by wagons suggesting extended operations. "They do not wait 30 days, Takoda observed grimly. The letter was merely formality, Sarah agreed. They never intended to honor the timeline. The council reconvened urgently, plans accelerated, with families assigned to specific mountain locations and essential supplies distributed. Sarah and Takoda would depart before dawn, taking a circuitous route to avoid cavalry patrols. In their dwelling, Sarah packed by firelight, every choice weighed against necessity and practicality. The map case would go in her medicine pouch, close against her body for protection. "You could remain here," Takoda said, unexpectedly. "Lead our people to the mountain refuge. You know the routes as well as any." Sarah looked up, startled by the implicit trust in his words. "You would entrust the tribe's safety to me. They are your people too," he replied simply, "and you have proven yourself in these months." The acknowledgement warmed her more deeply than any previous praise. "My place is with you," she answered. "Between worlds, remember, I must face Copper Creek to protect what we've built here." Takoda studied her face in the firelight. "When you first came, I wondered if you would ever truly leave your white life behind. Now I see the question was wrong." "How so?" "You did not leave it behind. You carried its strengths forward and abandoned only its limitations." His hand reached out, briefly touching hers. "This is why you survived where others would have failed." The contact, rare between them despite their married status, lingered longer than usual. In 6 months of shared dwelling, Takoda had never pressed for the physical consummation of their marriage, honoring his promise to wait until she fully chose Apache life. Now, facing separation and danger, Sarah made her choice. She turned her palm upward, interlacing her fingers with his. "Tonight," she said softly, "I am fully your wife." His eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. "You are sure?" Sarah nodded. "Whatever comes tomorrow, I know where I belong." As the fire burned low, the trader's map lay forgotten beside their sleeping mats, its carefully marked routes a testament to Sarah's transformation from outsider to defender of the people who had recognized her true worth, when no one else could see beyond her size and strength. Copper Creek appeared unchanged as Sarah and Takoda approached its outskirts, yet everything about their perspective had shifted. The town that once encompassed Sarah's entire world now seemed small and confining, its buildings hunched defensively against the vast landscape. "Wait here," Sarah instructed as they reached a sheltered arroyo within sight of the settlement. I'll return before nightfall. Dakota nodded, understanding the necessity of her entering alone. A white woman with an Apache husband would attract precisely the attention they sought to avoid. Still, concern shadowed his features. Be careful, wife. The tender address so recently claimed, in truth, brought warmth to Sarah's cheeks. She unpacked the bundle containing her final transformation, a simple white cotton dress preserved from her previous life. Donning it felt like stepping into a stranger's skin after months in Apache clothing. The fabric restricted her movements, the collar chafed her sun-darkened neck, and the sleeves constrained arms now accustomed to freedom. "How do I look?" she asked, adjusting the unfamiliar garment. "Like someone pretending to be Sarah Miller," Dakota replied honestly. She smiled at his perception. "That's exactly what I am now." The walk into town tested Sarah's resolve. Each step in leather shoes instead of moccasins felt clumsy, each nod to passing townspeople a performance. She kept her eyes downcast, hat brim shading her face, hoping to delay recognition until she reached her destination. The law office of Harold Bennett occupied a narrow building between the general store and the barber shop. Sarah hesitated at its door, gathering courage before entering a world governed by rules she had once accepted, without question. The bell's jingle announced her arrival. A thin man with spectacles looked up from his desk, his professional smile freezing as recognition dawned. "Miss Miller," he exclaimed, rising so abruptly, his chair nearly toppled. "Good heavens, we thought you were—" He stopped, apparently reconsidering his words. "Dead," Sarah supplied calmly. "Or worse, Mr. Bennett. Your father and sister will be overjoyed," the lawyer continued, ignoring her question. "There have been such terrible rumors." "I'm sure there have been," Sarah replied. "However, I haven't come for a social call. I need legal advice regarding land claims under the Homestead Act." Bennett blinked rapidly behind his spectacles. "Land claim? But surely your first concern is returning to your family." "My family situation is not your concern," Sarah said firmly. "The legal status of Apache territorial rights, however, falls within your professional expertise. Will you assist me, or shall I seek counsel elsewhere?" Her directness, a quality once considered her greatest social failing, now served her well. Bennett gestured toward a chair, professional interest overcoming his curiosity. "The Homestead Act does permit claims by single women or heads of households," he explained after hearing her carefully edited inquiry. "However, there are complications regarding Indian spouses." "I suspected as much," Sarah replied. "What alternatives exist?" Their discussion continued for nearly an hour, Bennett gradually shifting from shocked condescension to reluctant professional respect, as Sarah demonstrated unexpected legal knowledge. She had spent weeks studying territorial statutes in Dakota's small collection of confiscated government documents. "Your best approach might be mineral rights," Bennett finally suggested. "If you could prove valuable deposits on tribal land, you could file mining claims that would prevent immediate removal, even temporarily," Sarah pressed. "It would force a survey and formal assessment," he confirmed. "That process typically takes months." As they concluded their business, the office door opened to admit Sheriff Burke. He froze mid-step, staring at Sarah as if seeing a ghost. "Well," he drawled after recovering his composure, "if it isn't the chief's squaw, return to civilization." Sarah met his gaze steadily. Sheriff Burke, still wearing that badge as if it means something. His eyes narrowed at her defiance. "It means plenty to folks being raided by your husband's renegades." "What raids?" Sarah demanded. "Dakota's people have maintained peace." "Tell that to the Henderson family," Burke retorted. "Found their ranch burned 3 days ago. Livestock taken, Apache arrows everywhere." The news struck Sarah like physical blow. "That's not possible. I've been with the tribe continuously. There have been no raids." "Maybe they didn't tell their white pet everything," the sheriff suggested with ugly satisfaction. "Or maybe you've gone native enough to lie for them." Bennett intervened uncomfortably. "Sheriff, Miss Miller, Mrs. Takoda came for legal consultation, which falls under confidential privilege. Burke ignored him. The territorial governors issued new orders. All Apache off-reservation lands by week's end, or the army handles it their way. He stepped closer to Sarah. That includes white women playing Indian. I'm a legally married woman, Sarah replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. My husband has treaty rights. Treaties just got cancelled, Burke interrupted. Too many dead settlers for paperwork to matter now. As Sarah left the law office, her mind churned with implications. The Henderson attack made no sense. Takoda's warriors had been continuously in village or hunting far south, yet the sheriff seemed genuinely convinced of Apache involvement. She hurried toward the general store, needing to verify Burke's claims before returning to Takoda. The white cotton dress felt increasingly like a costume, its constraints symbolic of the suffocating half-truths surrounding her. The store's familiar bell jangled as she entered. Behind the counter stood not her father, but Eliza, who looked up absently then froze, color draining from her face. "Sarah?" her sister whispered, reaching for the counter's edge to steady herself. "Is it really you?" In that moment of genuine emotion, Sarah temporarily set aside her mission. Whatever complications lay ahead, her sister's trembling joy deserved acknowledgement. "It's me, Eliza," she confirmed softly. "Very much alive and with much to tell you. Father will be at the saloon until evening," Eliza explained as she locked the store's front door, flipping the sign to closed despite the mid-afternoon hour. She led Sarah to the back room, hands trembling with suppressed emotion. "We need to talk privately." The storeroom smelled of coffee beans and leather, unchanged from Sarah's memory yet somehow smaller than she recalled. Eliza lit the small lamp on the cluttered desk, then turned to study her sister properly in the warm light. "You look different," she said finally. "Not just your skin or your hair. Everything about you has changed." Sarah nodded, accepting the assessment without defensiveness. "I am different. Are you happy?" Eliza asked directly, surprising Sarah with her forthright approach. The younger Miller sister had always been tactfully indirect, smoothing social waters that Sarah inevitably troubled. "Yes," Sarah answered honestly, "happier than I ever expected to be." Relief softened Eliza's features. "Then I'm glad, despite everything." She pulled a folded document from beneath the ledger book. "This arrived for you yesterday. It seems providential that you've returned now." Sarah examined the official-looking paper, recognizing the governor's seal. "How did this come here?" "Lieutenant Harrington delivered it personally," Eliza explained. "He said he met you among the Apache." The document contained formal notice of the relocation order, specifically naming Miss Sarah Miller Takoda and offering her safe passage to Copper Creek should she wish to return to civilization before military action commences. "The lieutenant seemed concerned for your welfare," Eliza added. "He mentioned that as a white woman you wouldn't be subject to forced relocation if you left your husband." Sarah carefully refolded the notice. "That won't happen." Eliza studied her sister's resolute expression, then nodded acceptance. "I suspected as much. What about these raid accusations?" "Father says the whole territory's inflamed against the Apache. That's why I'm here," Sarah explained. "The Henderson raid, what exactly happened?" Eliza's brow furrowed. "Their ranch was burned 3 nights ago. The family escaped, but they lost everything. Mr. Henderson claims he saw Apache warriors. Which direction is their ranch?" "North of town, maybe 10 miles. Sarah shook her head decisively. "Dakota's people have been nowhere near there. Our hunters have been south in the Mesquite Flats for weeks." "Then who?" "That's what I need to discover," Sarah interrupted. "Someone wants to provoke military action against peaceful Apache." Comprehension dawned in Eliza's eyes. "The mining interests." Sarah looked at her sister with newfound respect. "You know about that. Copper Creek has changed too," Eliza replied with unexpected firmness. "After you left, I had to become more observant. The bank's been buying land north of town, And there are strangers staying at the hotel, men with Eastern accents and expensive suits. Blackwood, Sarah murmured, the banker who had nearly forced their family into ruin. He's behind much of it, Eliza confirmed. But he's working with others now, powerful men from Tucson. She hesitated, then added, men who would benefit greatly if certain Apache-controlled lands suddenly became available for mining claims. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her once sheltered sister's perceptiveness. I need to see the Henderson place, she decided. If this was staged to justify military action, you can't go alone, Eliza protested. The roads aren't safe, especially for a woman associated with the Apache. I won't be alone, Sarah assured her. Dakota waits outside town. Concern crossed Eliza's face. Sarah, if he's seen, he won't be, Sarah promised. But we need to leave before dark. Eliza nodded, then reached beneath the counter again, withdrawing another document, this one bearing the bank's seal. Before you go, you should know about this. Sarah examined the paper, a deed transferring ownership of Miller General Store from Thomas Miller to Eliza Miller. Father signed over the business, she asked incredulously. After you left, he changed. Eliza explained. The drinking worsened at first, then suddenly stopped. He said he'd failed one daughter and wouldn't fail another. Her voice softened. Your choice forced him to confront his weaknesses. He still struggles, but he's trying to make amends. Sarah absorbed this unexpected development, emotions tangled between surprise, vindication, and a complex sadness for what might have been. And the store proper's under your management. Pride straightened Eliza's spine. We've expanded our trading network. I've even established regular commerce with the Navajo to the north. A smile touched her lips. It seems the Miller women have a knack for cross-cultural business. I'm proud of you, Sarah said simply. Eliza's eyes glistened. Will I see you again after today? The question held the weight of their shared history and diverging futures. Sarah couldn't offer false comfort. The path ahead held too many unknowns. I hope so, she answered honestly. But my place is with Dakota and his people now, whatever comes. As they embraced in farewell, Sarah felt the final threads connecting her to her old identity gently releasing. The bank deed on the counter represented more than transferred ownership. It symbolized Eliza's emergence from her shadow and Sarah's freedom to fully embrace her chosen life. Be careful, Eliza whispered, and tell your husband that not everyone in Copper Creek believes the raid stories. Sarah nodded gratefully, then slipped out through the store's back entrance, the white cotton dress feeling increasingly like a disguise she could scarcely tolerate. Soon she would rejoin Dakota, shed this constrictive garment, and continue their investigation, now with crucial new information about mining interests and falsified raids. As she moved furtively toward the town's edge, Sarah realized she had crossed an invisible threshold. She had returned to Copper Creek, not as a prodigal daughter seeking reconciliation, but as an emissary between worlds, fighting for justice on behalf of the people who had recognized her true worth when her own kind could not. Dusk shrouded the landscape as Sarah and Dakota approached the ruins of the Henderson Ranch. Smoke still rose from blackened timbers, though the fire had burned out days ago. They left their horses concealed in a stand of cottonwoods and proceeded on foot, alert to any sign of military patrols or vigilantes. Something is wrong here, Dakota murmured as they surveyed the destruction. The burn pattern is strange. Sarah nodded agreement. She had witnessed accidental fires before, a hazard of frontier life. But this scene struck her as oddly deliberate. The house and barn had been completely consumed, yet the corral stood untouched. Valuable farm equipment remained in neat rows, undamaged and untaken. Raiders would have stolen the plow and harness, she observed. Those fetch good prices in trading posts. They moved cautiously among the ruins, Sarah's white dress now exchanged for practical buckskins that allowed silent movement. The main house had less into its stone foundation, leaving a hollow shell of charred timber and ash. Look, Dakota said suddenly, kneeling to examine something protruding from the debris. With careful fingers he extracted a charred arrow shaft. Sarah bent closer. Even blackened by fire, certain details remained visible, particularly the distinctive fletching pattern. "This isn't Apache," she said with certainty. "No," Dakota confirmed grimly. "The feathers are wrong. And the binding," he pointed to the sinew wrapping the shaft. "No Apache would tie fletching this way. This is made to look like our arrows, but by someone who has only seen them at a distance." Sarah wrapped the evidence carefully in a scrap of leather. "We need to find the Hendersons. Their testimony could prove these raids were staged." Tracking the displaced family proved easier than expected. Neighbors had taken them in, the Wilsons, whose ranch lay several miles east. As Sarah and Dakota approached the Wilson property under cover of darkness, they debated strategy. "They won't speak to me," Dakota acknowledged. "At best they would flee, at worst, shoot." "I'll go alone," Sarah decided. "Mrs. Wilson attended the same church as my family. She might at least listen before raising the alarm." Dakota clearly disliked the plan, but recognized its necessity. "Be watchful," he cautioned. "If they have already committed to the raid story." "I understand the risk," Sarah assured him. The Wilson farmhouse glowed with lamplight. As Sarah approached openly, hands visible to show she carried no weapons. A dog barked, alerting the household. The door opened, revealing a man with a shotgun. "Who's there?" he called. "Sarah Miller," she replied, using her maiden name deliberately. "I've come to speak with the Hendersons about what happened at their ranch." Confused consultation occurred inside before the door widened. Mrs. Wilson peered out, recognition dawning. "Sarah Miller, Thomas Miller's daughter. We heard you'd been taken by Indians." "I married Chief Dakota," Sarah corrected calmly, "and I'm investigating the attacks blamed on his people." More urgent whispers followed this revelation. Finally, Miss Wilson stepped onto the porch. "Martha Henderson is resting. The shock, you understand. But Frank might speak with you." Her tone suggested deep reservations. "Though why you'd defend those savages after what they did?" Sarah bit back a sharp response, reminding herself of her purpose. "That's precisely what I need to discuss." Frank Henderson proved to be a weathered man in his 40s, his face lined with exhaustion and recent trauma. He regarded Sarah with suspicion as she was shown into the kitchen. "Miller's girl," he acknowledged. "Heard you'd gone native." "I married according to territorial law," Sarah replied evenly. "And I've come about the raid on your property." Henderson's expression hardened. "Not much to tell. Indians attacked at night, burned us out. We barely escaped with our lives." "Did you see them clearly?" Sarah pressed. "Clear enough to know Apache when I see them," he replied defensively. "How many raiders?" "6, maybe 8. They wore war paint, shot arrows." "What more do you need to know?" Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Henderson, I've lived among Chief Dakota's people for months. They've conducted no raids. Someone is falsifying attacks to provoke military action." Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know what I saw." "Did you?" Sarah challenged gently. "Or did you see what someone wanted you to see? Men dressed as Apache firing arrows with incorrect fletching, burning your home but conveniently leaving valuable equipment untouched." Alarm flickered across Henderson's face. "How did you know about the equipment?" "Because I visited your ranch tonight," Sarah admitted. "The evidence doesn't support a genuine Apache raid. It suggests a carefully staged scene." Henderson glanced toward the doorway, ensuring they weren't overheard. "You're putting me in a dangerous position, Miss whatever you call yourself now." "The truth often does that," Sarah acknowledged. "But innocent people will die if these false raids continue, both Apache and settler." Something in her words seemed to reach him. Henderson exhaled heavily. "It was dark," he conceded. "I only caught glimpses. When the sheriff suggested Apache raiders," he shrugged, "seemed to fit what little I saw. And there was an arrow in my doorframe." "An arrow like this?" Sarah carefully produced the charred shaft. Henderson examined it, frowning. "Similar, yes. This fletching pattern is wrong for any Apache tribe," Sarah explained. "Someone went to considerable trouble to create false evidence." Henderson's expression shifted from suspicion to uncertainty. Why would anyone? He stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning. The men who visited last month. They asked about selling my land. Mining interests, Sarah supplied. They need Apache removal to access mineral deposits in tribal territories. The conversation continued in hushed tones, Henderson gradually revealing more details that contradicted the official raid narrative. By the time Sarah departed, she carried something more valuable than the arrow shaft, a signed statement questioning the identity of the attackers, and admitting Henderson never clearly saw Apache warriors. As she rejoined Takoda in the darkness, Sarah felt both vindication and dread. They had evidence of deception, but revealing it would make powerful enemies. Henderson will testify, Takoda asked as they mounted their horses. If necessary, Sarah confirmed. But we need more than one witness to counter this campaign. The question is, who orchestrated it, and how many more false raids are planned? Takoda added grimly, before the army has its excuse for war. Dawn found Sarah and Takoda concealed in the hills overlooking Fort Wilson, the territorial outpost from which Lieutenant Harrington had delivered the relocation orders. The fort buzzed with unusual activity, supply wagons being loaded, cavalry units drilling in the yard, officers conferring over maps spread on outdoor tables. Preparations for a campaign, Takoda observed grimly. They gather strength before moving against our people. Sarah studied the scene through Takoda's brass spyglass, focusing on the officers. That man in the blue uniform with gold braiding, he's not regular army. Territorial government, perhaps. They had spent the night collecting evidence, visiting 2 other homesteads reportedly raided by Apache. The pattern held consistent strategic damage designed to provoke fear without significant property loss, conveniently discovered Apache artifacts, and witnesses who had seen shadowy figures but could identify no specific individuals. We need to their timeline, Sarah said, lowering the spyglass. When they plan to move, which routes they'll take. Takoda's expression revealed his doubt. The fort is heavily guarded. Even if we could enter, military documents would be closely protected. Not all information stays within walls, Sarah replied. Soldiers talk, especially in town. If I could get close enough to listen. Too dangerous, Takoda objected immediately. You're known now as my wife. If recognized, I'll disguise myself, Sarah interrupted. The laundry women who work at the fort gather at Simmons Creek to wash the soldiers' clothing. I could join them, appear to be just another worker. Takoda studied her face, recognizing the determination there. After months together, he had learned when argument was futile. I will remain close, he conceded. At the first sign of trouble, I'll withdraw immediately, Sarah promised. The plan proceeded with careful preparation. Sarah muddied her distinctive dress, covered her hair with a worn shawl, and carried a basket of soap and brushes, borrowed from abandoned homestead outbuildings. By mid-morning she had integrated herself among the laundresses, mostly Mexican and Yaqui women, who asked few questions of a newcomer willing to share their grueling work. As Sarah scrubbed uniforms against washing stones, her ears captured fragments of conversation from soldiers who came to flirt with the younger women. Most chatter proved useless, complaints about rations, boasts of fighting prowess, crude jokes. Then a young corporal approached, carrying what appeared to be officers' uniforms. Special cleaning for these, he instructed a nearby woman. Colonel wants them pristine for tomorrow's dispatch to Apache territory. Sarah edged closer, feigning concentration on her washing. More Apache trouble? The laundress asked with practiced interest. The corporal glanced around, then lowered his voice importantly. Big operation. Coordinated attack on 3 villages simultaneously. The colonel says we'll solve the Apache problem once and for all. Sarah's hands trembled slightly, but she maintained her role, keeping her face downturned as the corporal continued sharing operational details to impress the young woman. When he finally departed, Sarah moved casually toward the bushes, where she'd hidden her dry clothing, intending to change and return to Takoda with this critical information. As she reached the thicket, A hand grasped her arm. Sarah whirled, prepared to defend herself, only to find Lieutenant Harrington staring at her with shocked recognition. "Mrs. Dakota," he hissed, glancing around to ensure they weren't observed. "What are you doing here?" Sarah's mind raced through possible explanations. The lieutenant's expression showed confusion rather than hostility, giving her hope he might be reasoned with. "Investigating the truth," she replied quietly. "The raids blamed on Apache were staged, Lieutenant." "I have evidence." Harrington's grip loosened slightly. "That's a serious accusation, with serious proof," Sarah countered. "Why else would I risk coming here?" The lieutenant studied her face, conflict evident in his young features. "You should leave immediately. If others recognize you, not without information," Sarah insisted. "They're planning attacks on Apache villages, aren't they? Innocent people will die for a lie." Harrington's eyes widened. "How did you—" He stopped, then made a decision. Reaching inside his jacket, he withdrew a folded dispatch. "I found this troubling," he admitted. "The orders specifically mention eliminating resistance in villages with no history of hostility." Sarah accepted the document with trembling fingers. The military dispatch outlined the upcoming operation in cold detail, coordinated attacks on 3 Apache encampments, including Dakota's village, scheduled to begin at dawn the following day. The orders authorized maximum force to ensure complete subjugation. "This is genocide," Sarah whispered, scanning the operational details. "It's war," Harrington corrected uncomfortably. "Based on increasing Apache aggression." "Fabricated aggression," Sarah insisted. "Lieutenant, I can prove these raids were staged. The arrows left at scene weren't Apache-made. The witnesses never clearly identified raiders. It's all orchestrated to justify seizing mineral-rich land." Uncertainty crossed Harrington's face. "Even if what you say is true, these orders come from territorial command." "I'm just a lieutenant with conscience," Sarah observed. "Otherwise you wouldn't be showing me this." She carefully memorized the document's details before returning it. "I need time to warn the villagers." Harrington hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "I can't help you directly, but inspection of equipment has revealed some deficiencies. I might recommend delaying the operation by 1 day to ensure proper preparedness." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "I'm not helping Indians," Harrington clarified, military training wrestling with personal ethics. "I'm preventing an injustice against American citizens who deserve proper investigation before military action." Sarah recognized the distinction as important to the young officer's self-justification. "Of course, Lieutenant." As she slipped away to rejoin Dakota, the military dispatch's details burned in her memory. Troop numbers, routes, timing. They had perhaps 36 hours to warn not just their own village, but 2 others, all while lapped on evidence that might halt the operation entirely. The machinery of government, represented by that stamped and coded document, now rolled inexorably toward conflict. Their only hope lay in proving the raids were fabricated before the villages faced the full might of the United States cavalry. "We cannot reach all 3 villages in time," Dakota concluded as they rode hard toward their home. Night had fallen, making travel treacherous, but urgency drove them forward. Even with runners, the northernmost settlement is 2 days' ride. Sarah processed this grim reality. "Then we must stop the attack at its source. Prove the raids were falsified before the soldiers march." "How?" "Military orders come from territorial command. Even with Henderson's statement, they won't halt an approved operation without overwhelming evidence." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as their horses navigated the rocky trail. "The banker, Blackwood, he's connected to this. Eliza mentioned mining interests, meeting at his bank. If we could find documentation linking him to the false raids, breaking into the bank would wide us actual criminals." Dakota pointed out. "There may be another way," Sarah said slowly. "Lieutenant Harrington has doubts." If we could provide enough evidence to justify his delaying the operation further, combined with public exposure of the scheme, they reached the village near midnight to find it peaceful in moonlight, unaware of the threat looming just hours away. After rousing the council elders, Takoda explained the situation while Sarah translated the military dispatch details from memory. "We must prepare to defend ourselves," Apache argued immediately, "against cavalry with rifles and cannons." Sarah countered, "That ensures destruction. We could retreat to the high mountains," suggested Nahamana. "The soldiers' horses cannot follow where our people can climb. That abandons our homes, our crops, everything we've built," Helika objected. As debate continued, Sarah slipped away to their dwelling. Inside, she gathered specific items: Henderson's statement, the falsified arrow, samples of genuine Apache arrowheads for comparison, and documentation of their treaty rights. Most crucially, she found a piece of white cloth, a cotton sheet traded months ago from settlers. When she returned, Takoda was organizing evacuation preparations, despite ongoing disagreement. He looked up as Sarah entered, immediately recognizing her expression. "You have decided something," he observed. "I'm going to the military camp," she announced to the stunned council. Under flag of truce, with evidence of the false raids, protests erupted immediately. Takoda silenced them, with a raised hand, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Explain your thinking, wife. Lieutenant Harrington already harbors doubts," Sarah said. "With Henderson's signed statement and the physical evidence of the falsified arrows, I might convince him to seek formal investigation before attacking." "And if you fail?" Apache demanded. "Then I've lost nothing but my own safety," Sarah replied calmly. "The village will still have time to evacuate to defensive positions." Takoda studied her with an intensity that would once have made her uncomfortable. Now she met his gaze steadily. Partnership forged through months of shared challenges. "You would risk yourself for the people," he stated rather than asked. "They are my people too," Sarah answered simply. After further debate, a compromise emerged. Sarah would approach the military camp at dawn with her evidence and truce flag. Meanwhile, the village would prepare for both evacuation and defense, readying women, children, and elders to move to mountain refuges, while warriors established protective positions. "I should accompany you," Takoda insisted as they returned to their dwelling to prepare. Sarah shook her head. "Your presence would undermine everything. They need to see me as a concerned American citizen presenting evidence, not as an Apache chief's wife defending her tribe." "You speak as if these are different people," Takoda observed. "To them they are," Sarah replied, sad. "I must use their perception to our advantage." Through the night, Sarah worked on the white flag, attaching the sheet to a slender branch, and adding a visible American flag emblem cut from an old trading document. By false dawn, she had changed into her white cotton dress again, hair arranged in settler fashion, her evidence organized in a leather portfolio. As she prepared to depart, Takoda approached with something in his hands, her mother's shawl carefully preserved since their wedding day. "For protection," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "And remembrance of who you truly are, regardless of how you must appear." The simple gesture nearly broke Sarah's composure. She reached for him, propriety forgotten, as she embraced her husband fiercely. "I will return," she promised. "I know," Takoda replied with unexpected gentleness. "You have the warrior's heart. But remember, even warriors must sometimes retreat to fight another day." Sarah understood his meaning. If her mission failed, she should not sacrifice herself in futile resistance. The knowledge that he valued her life above pride or even justice deepened her determination to succeed. As sunrise gilded the eastern mountains, Sarah mounted her horse, white flag secured to her saddle. The village gathered to watch her departure, faces solemn with awareness of what she risked on their behalf. "Tell the elders, be ready for any outcome," she instructed Apache, who had become her unlikely ally in recent months. "If I'm not back by midday, we will be prepared," he assured her. "Go with strength, sister." The address, acknowledging her as family rather than outsider, gave Sarah courage as she rode toward the military encampment. The white flag fluttered above her head, its makeshift nature belying the gravity of her mission. In her hands lay not just evidence of deception, but the fate of hundreds of innocent lives. The military encampment sprawled across the valley floor, canvas tents arranged in regimented rows, morning cook fires sending smoke signals into the dawn sky. Sarah approached slowly, white flag held high, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. Sentries spotted her when she was still half a mile distant, their rifles raising then lowering, as they recognized both her gender and her signal. "Halt and identify yourself," called a young corporal as she reached the perimeter. "Sarah Miller Takoda," she replied clearly. "I request audience with Lieutenant Harrington on urgent business concerning the Apache operation." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances before one departed to relay her request. Sarah remained mounted, the white flag steady in her hand, aware of curious and hostile stares from the gathered troops. Whispers spread through the camp. The white woman who had gone native, the trader's daughter turned squaw. Lieutenant Harrington emerged from the command tent, his expression carefully neutral as he approached. "Mrs. Takoda," he acknowledged. "This is most irregular, as is attacking peaceful settlements based on falsified evidence," she replied, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. The lieutenant glanced around at the watching soldiers. "Dismount and come with me. Your horse will be attended." Sarah followed Harrington to a smaller tent set slightly apart from the others. Inside waited an older officer whose insignia identified him as the colonel mentioned in the dispatch. "Colonel Briggs, this is Mrs. Takoda," Harrington introduced her with careful formality. "She has information pertinent to our operation." The colonel's weathered face registered disapproval. "The white woman, living with Takoda's band. Your situation has been reported to me, Mrs. Takoda, though I understand your maiden name is Miller. My legal name and status are not relevant to the information I bring," Sarah replied, maintaining her dignity despite his dismissive tone. "What matters is evidence that the Apache raids justifying this military action were staged." Colonel Briggs snorted. "Staged? By whom, pray tell? And for what purpose?" Sarah opened her leather portfolio, presenting Henderson's signed statement first. Frank Henderson admits he never clearly identified Apache raiders at his homestead. He was pressured to support that narrative by influential parties. The colonel skimmed the document with obvious skepticism. "One confused settler proves nothing." Next, Sarah produced the false arrow alongside a genuine Apache shaft. These were left at raid sites as evidence. No Apache would create fletching this way. The binding technique is wrong. The feather alignment incorrect. They were manufactured to implicate the tribe. Harrington leaned forward with interest, examining the arrows. "She's right about the construction, sir. I've studied native weaponry extensively." "Fascinating lecture on aboriginal archery," Briggs said dryly. Still far from proving conspiracy, Sarah had anticipated his resistance. "Then perhaps this will interest you more." She withdrew her final piece of evidence, a silver pocket watch she had discovered during their nighttime investigation of the Anderson homestead, allegedly raided just hours before her meeting with Henderson. "This was dropped at the most recent raid site," Sarah explained, opening the watch to reveal an engraving inside the case. "Property of J.W. Blackwood, Copper Creek Banking and Trust." Harrington's eyes widened. "The bank who happens to be heavily invested in mining operations," Sarah continued. "Operations that require access to mineral deposits currently on Apache land." Colonel Briggs's expression remained impassive, but he accepted the watch, examining it carefully. Circumstantial at best, the watch could have been stolen previously by actual Apache raiders. "A rather expensive item for a banker to lose track of," Sarah countered. "And curious that Apache raiders would carry it to multiple attack sites, rather than trading such a valuable piece immediately." The colonel and lieutenant exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Harrington cleared his throat. "Sir, given this new information, perhaps we should delay the operation pending further investigation. Delay a direct order from Territorial Command based on a pocket watch and some questionable arrows." Briggs shook his head. Impossible. Then arrest me, Sarah said suddenly. Both men stared at her in confusion. Arrest me for interfering with military operations, she clarified. Take me to territorial headquarters in Tucson. I'll present my evidence directly to the governor, with witnesses present. If my claims are deemed without merit, you've lost nothing but a day's march. And if Apache warriors use that day to prepare ambush, the colonel challenged. I give you my word, they won't, Sarah replied steadily. Dakota has agreed to remain peaceful if given opportunity for fair hearing. Colonel Briggs studied her with grudging respect. You're an unusual woman, Mrs. Dakota. These are unusual circumstances, Colonel. After a tense silence, Briggs made his decision. Lieutenant, prepare an escort detail. We'll transport Mrs. Dakota and her evidence to Tucson immediately. He fixed Sarah with a stern gaze. But understand this. If your peacekeeping mission is some form of delay tactic or trap, I will personally ensure the consequences fall heavily on Dakota's people. All I seek is justice and truth, Sarah assured him. The same principles your uniform represents. As Harrington led her from the tent to prepare for the journey, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure among a group of civilians observing the camp from a nearby ridge. Blackwood himself, accompanied by several well-dressed men who could only be the mining investors Eliza had mentioned. Lieutenant, she said quietly, those men on the hillside, they should be prevented from leaving before we reach Tucson. Harrington followed her gaze, understanding dawning as he recognized the banker. I'll assign men to ensure they remain available for questioning. Within the hour, Sarah found herself in an army wagon, headed south toward the territorial capital, her evidence secured beside her, armed soldiers providing escort. The silver watch rested in her pocket, final proof of a conspiracy that had nearly triggered massacre. As the encampment disappeared behind them, Sarah allowed herself the smallest measure of hope. She had bought time for Dakota's people, though the final outcome remained uncertain. The machinery of justice moved as slowly as the creaking wagon carrying her toward Tucson, but it moved nonetheless, propelled by truth and the unexpected alliance between a chief's wife and a conscience-stricken lieutenant. Spring sunshine warmed the trading post that straddled two worlds, a sturdy structure of timber and adobe standing precisely on the boundary line between territorial and tribal lands. Above its entrance, a hand-painted sign proclaimed Miller Dakota Trading Company in both English and Apache characters. Sarah adjusted the leather-bound ledger on the counter, her practiced hand recording the day's transactions. The book's neat columns reflected more than mere commerce. They documented a fragile peace built through perseverance and truth. The Wilsons need more seed corn, Dakota observed, entering from the storeroom with a crate of supplies. Their youngest boy says the first planting was lost to frost. Sarah nodded, making a note. We can spare it from the southern field harvest. I'll arrange transport tomorrow. A year had transformed their lives in ways neither could have imagined during those tense days in Tucson. The territorial hearings had exposed Blackwood's conspiracy, how he and mining investors had orchestrated false raids, manipulated witnesses, and attempted to provoke military action against peaceful Apache to gain access to mineral deposits. The banker now occupied a cell in Yuma prison. His carefully constructed empire collapsed into disgrace. The settlement that emerged from those proceedings was imperfect, but revolutionary. Dakota's people retained rights to their ancestral lands under a special territorial dispensation, while agreeing to specific boundaries and formalized trading relationships with settler communities. The trading post had been Sarah's inspiration, a physical manifestation of cooperation, where commerce could gradually build trust between cultures, long taught to fear each other. Father's late returning from Copper Creek, Sarah noted, glancing at the western horizon. The wagon was heavy with supplies, Dakota reminded her, and he likely stopped to visit Eliza at the schoolhouse. The mention of her sister brought a smile to Sarah's face. Eliza had surprised everyone by transforming part of the general store into a small school that welcomed both settler and Apache children. Her gentle persistence was gradually eroding prejudices that Sarah's more direct approach could not. As if summoned by their conversation, Thomas Miller's wagon appeared on the horizon. The past year had restored him in ways the bottle never could. His back straighter, his eyes clear, his hands steady as they guided the team of horses. 3 new families arrived in town, he announced, as he climbed down from the wagon. Farmers, not miners. Good people, from what I could tell. He unloaded a stack of mail and newspapers. Eliza sends her love. Says she'll visit when school breaks for planting season. Sarah accepted the letters, including one bearing the Fort Wilson insignia. Lieutenant Harrington, now captain, maintained correspondence, his initial reluctant alliance having evolved into respectful friendship. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers. Apache women trading handcrafted goods for cloth and metal tools, settlers exchanging produce for medicinal herbs, available only on tribal lands. Sarah moved between them with practiced diplomacy, her command of both languages creating bridges where barriers once stood. As evening approached, she felt the now familiar flutter of movement beneath her heart. Her hand moved instinctively to the gentle swell of her pregnancy, visible evidence of the future being forged between 2 worlds. Dakota noticed the gesture and crossed to her side, his hand covering hers. These public displays of affection, once unthinkable for an Apache chief, had become his quiet rebellion against old constraints. The medicine woman says the child will come with the summer thunderstorms, Sarah told him softly. Strong timing for a strong child like its mother. Dakota replied, the warmth in his eyes visible only to those who knew to look for it. Later, as they closed the trading post and walked the short distance to their home, a dwelling that combined the circular structure of a traditional Apache wickiup with the straight lines of a settler's cabin, Sarah paused to survey the world they had created. To the east lay the Apache village, smoke rising from cooking fires as children played beneath cottonwood trees. To the west, the expanding settlement of Copper Creek, where windows now glowed with lamplight rather than suspicion. Between them stood the trading post, and beyond it their home, a place bridging divided worlds. Inside, mounted carefully on the wall above their fireplace, hung a small section of broken bed frame preserved from that day in Copper Creek, when laughter had echoed through the trading post. At Sarah's what once symbolized shame had been transformed into a reminder of how strength could be mocked by those who didn't understand its value, and treasured by those who did. Sarah touched the weathered wood briefly before opening the ledger to record the day's final figures. In its pages she saw more than transactions. She saw the story of a woman who had found her place, not by fitting into the world, as others demanded, but by creating a new world where she could stand tall in the fullness of who she was. The child within her stirred again, as if in agreement. Whatever came next, they would face it together, strong enough to bear any weight, and wise enough to recognize the difference between breaking and bending towards something better.